Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of my interview, part 2 or 3, depending on how we cut this up, of my interview with Sandra Tanner about Mark Hofmann, about her and Jerald Tanner and their experiences together. And now, finally, because I go as deep and as long as my interviewees will let me, now we're going to finally actually get to Sandra's reactions to the amazing, groundbreaking Netflix documentary produced and written and directed and written by Jerald Hess and Tyler Measom, my dear friends, Murder Among the Mormons, about the Mark Hofmann story. We've just spent several hours talking to Sandra about her knowledge of Mark Hofmann and her life with Jerald and everything leading up to the bombings and all that other sort of stuff. We've talked about the documentary here and there along the way, but what we haven't actually done is gotten Sandra's reactions to the documentary, or at least in any consolidated way. So Sandra, you've been super generous with this so far. You're a true warrior. Thank you.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Well, losing my voice, but I'm doing pretty good.
I am cruel and inhumane sometimes, but only with the best of intentions. Okay, so we've talked all a bit around Mark Hofmann and everything in the documentary. Let's just jump right in. What'd you think of it? And I could ask more detailed questions, but do you have any collected thoughts on high level reactions, things you liked, things you didn't like, your favorite parts, things you hated, things you wished had been in it, things you wished you hadn't? Where do you want to begin?
Well, first reactions. I was very pleased to see that they were able to pull together so much TV footage from the time period and the news reports to give you a better flavor of the people and what was going on at the time. I'm sure that in their interviews with the different ones like myself that they did, which they did hours with all of us, they would have had a lot of that same information from the people they interviewed. Which they didn't use. But I thought it was very powerful to actually have the newscasts of the day. It made it all seem much more real and engaging. So I thought that was wonderful that they were able to pull that much footage together.
And my understanding is a lot of that came from KSL, which means that the church would have had to cooperate in the
they would have to give them approval for that footage to be used. Yes,
which is to their credit.
Yes,
and I'm just guessing and speculating, but it would be to their credit to have managed things in a way to where the church would have felt comfortable cooperating with them to give them that footage.
Yes, I'm sure that there had to be assurances made to the church that it would be as fair as possible to them for the church to give that kind of access.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very impressive. I was surprised at some of the footage they were able to recover because I just didn't know there would at this date that there would be that much archival material that you could pull together to tell the story. Mm-hmm. So I thought that made it very interesting. Because of the way they framed it, they had to exclude a lot of the story because they were trying to build a case of these documents gradually coming out and no hint of any question of their authenticity, building up to the surprise to everyone when the bombings came. That, oh my goodness, why would this happen? And, we never suspected. Well, there were some that didn't suspect, but there were some of us that had. And so I was a little disappointed that they didn't use any of my discussion of how Jerald had questioned the documents a year before. But from their from their point of view, I can see why they didn't. If you're trying to build to the outside audience who doesn't know anything about the story, that you just build this case of suspense, no one had a clue, and then bam, suddenly you have these explosions and it all comes out. but the story was a little more complicated than that. But that's TV. When you're dealing with any kind of documentary, docudrama kind of story, the producers have to frame it in a compelling way that they think will keep the audience engaged to the end. So, I mean, I understand why they had to do it that way, but it leaves you with just 2/3 of the story. There's other parts of the story that never got explored or came out.
I mean, I know, I think, and I'll ask them this, I think they'd proposed like a 6-part segment. I think they only got approved for 3.
Yeah.
That's just my memory. And that really cuts down on what you're able to tell. But I was sad that your story and Jerald's story wasn't told, not in a judgmental way of them, but just like, I think that's one of the coolest things I've ever heard in Mormon history. So the fact that it was left out of the treatment on Mark Hofmann made me a little bit sad.
Right.
Too. So you were a little bit sad about that?
Yes, I would have liked Jerald to have got the credit he deserved for that one.
Yeah, I'm sure they are sad about that too.
Yeah.
I don't want to disrupt your review, but I didn't ask you this in the last segment. Did you ever suspect Mark Hofmann in the bombings once the bombs went off, before he was ever fingered as a suspect? Did you and Jerald ever suspect that?
We suspected right off that it had to do with the documents. We didn't have it in our mind yet necessarily that Mark would have set the bombs, but that it related to that. When the first day they were trying to give news reports on, this may have had to do with some business deal of Sheets and Christensen's. And I'm saying, no, you don't get there with that story. I don't think we felt it had to do with Christensen's involvement in the documents.
Did you have a theory about what it could be?
Of who no?
With what motive?
No, at the time, I suppose our thoughts would have run more to the end of thinking of some devout, crazy Mormon that was upset that all these embarrassing documents were coming out.
Yeah.
And that someone's trying to stop Mark from bringing all these documents out.
Because he's like a champion. Maybe people saw him as a champion.
Yeah. So, of course, the Mormons, they would have had the opposite view, that it's the anti-Mormons trying to kill off all the people that are trying to do true Mormon history for the Mormons, So it all depend on your point of view. But we thought it had to do with the documents, but I wouldn't have fingered Mark as setting off the bombs on that first day.
Okay. And I didn't ask you this either. Once Jerald decided that the salamander letter wasn't authentic, did that make him want to question other documents that had been associated to Mark prior to the bombing? Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's why Jerald and I had many discussions about which is more probable, that a young man for 5 years could find every important document on Mormonism, or that a young man in 5 years could invent every major find on Mormon documents. And it didn't matter which way you played the scenario, neither one seemed plausible. And yet, here we have the situation. So what's the answer? But we would have had even more questions if we'd have known how many documents he had. We didn't know about a lot of them yet. But just the ones we did know about were incredible. Like our friend Wes Walters that did the research on the 1826 trial. That's one major find in a lifetime. Document dealers or document historians looking for stuff were not turning things up every month. So we asked different people, well, doesn't that raise a little question about how does he get so many? Oh, well, he does it full time, though. See, everyone else just does it on their vacation, and he does it full time. So that's why he can come up with so many. And, really? I mean, Wes has spent so many hours, done so many travels back to New York to try to find things. And it just doesn't seem plausible that he could find these. But then we didn't think it was plausible he could have made them up.
Yeah. Okay. So you debated about it, but in the end, Jerald didn't like.
We didn't know how to resolve it.
Yeah. But it sounds like you, even determining the salamander letter was not authentic, that didn't taint Mark. That didn't end up really tainting Mark in your eyes, functionally.
It tainted Mark. We just weren't sure that it would tainted all the documents because he was doing business like with Brent Ashworth and Benchmark. Well, it wasn't Benchmark yet. Anyways, with Kurt Bench on real documents. So some of the documents were real that he traded around because he'd get them in trade. So we didn't think it tainted everything he brought out.
And the idea of him
raised
being
the problem.
The idea of him being a forger, did that occur to you? Him being a forger?
Well, Jerald certainly was running down that track.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was hoping he was wrong.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. So you would wish that the documentary had told Jerald's story and your story. You always downplay yourself. And I think that might be a Mormon part of you, the kind of the patriarchy. The man is the presider.
No.
I wonder if there's a little bit of Mormon patriarchy still in your blood.
No, it's more.
You are a legend and a hero, Sandra Tanner, and you don't want to hear that, it seems like.
No. Well, I mean, honestly, it was early on, all that research was Jerald's. I was his helper, but he was the brains and he was the researcher. He wouldn't have got it done without me. But I would have never done it myself.
So it was a team effort.
It had to be a team.
It was like Samwise and Frodo together.
Yeah, that's right.
Frodo could have never destroyed the ring without the help of Samwise.
That's right.
So you are essential.
Yes, I'm essential, but I wasn't the main force.
I don't know. Okay, anyway. All right, so you were sad that story couldn't get told.
Yeah.
Other reactions. Sorry to take you away from your reaction.
It was interesting how they put together the different pro and con statements along the way, because it sort of left the viewer with determining whether it was helpful for the church or not. I think depended somewhat on your own perspective, what parts you focused in on. Because I think that Turley gets to say his part about, well, we can't expect the prophets to get everything, and they're only human, and and that kind of thing. And yet, on the other hand, they'd throw in stuff that would be critical of the church. So it raised both questions, and you as a viewer have to decide which of the different statements you found more compelling. I thought a genius part was putting in that one man saying he commanded Mark to live and giving him the priesthood blessing. Well, so much of how they put the thing together was kind of classic. Taking the early videos the Mormon Church made about the angel Moroni appearing to Joseph, even though it's Mormon archival material, I think it came across making Mormonism looking kind of cultish and kind of weird. And even that one fellow.
But they did it I guess what I hear when you say is the genius of that, and I'm not saying it was intentional, but it's using the church's own material to make the church potentially look a little bit weird.
Yeah.
But they can't be accused of trying to make the church look weird because it's the church's own material.
Their own material.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And so having this fellow say he commanded Mark to live because he saw he had the garments on, to the outside world looks like the most outlandish, naive sort of statement. But to a Mormon, I could see them all saying, "Oh, yes, isn't that wonderful?" So, but I thought they pulled a lot of the different elements together that way in a very good way that had both the positive and the negative on the situation, and left you as the viewer to decide if you thought the total film was helpful or not helpful to the church's image. I felt it didn't help, but as a Mormon might view it and think, oh, that was very nice. They were so fair.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second, because a lot of ex-Mormons who are in their angry phase wanted it to be just this hit piece that takes the church down.
And it could have been. They could have focused on the church's duplicity, on the documents. They're lying to the detectives. I mean, the detectives came out later and said that they knew that the church leaders were not being forthright with them when they went and interviewed them. So there's a lot of those elements.
Kind of obstructing justice.
Obstructing their investigation.
Yeah.
Hofmann meeting with Hinckley and Hinckley denying that, I never met with him, kind of stuff.
They did mention Hinckley saying that he did never take notes.
Yeah.
Do you think Hinckley is lying when he says he never took notes?
Well, he may have it recorded. He may not have taken notes.
So you're saying he might use this parceling legalistic language to have deniability.
Yeah.
Because how believable is it that such an important meeting would take place and there'd be no record?
I would suspect it was taped.
Right.
So he could say he didn't take notes.
And you think Hinckley would do that, lie in that sort of legalistic way?
Well, yeah, yes, because he's done it in other transactions where he has, like the church did not buy the papyri from the Metropolitan Museum, but they don't elaborate usually and tell you, well, the gift was made possible because they got a Mormon mission president to make a donation to the museum to get the things so that they can always have distance between them and spending money and all, so there's not a question of, how did you use tithing money, So I see them, yes, as very clever that way of how they would structure stuff.
Yeah. And you if you want to keep people from knowing you even have it, and then, you don't want to give people the impression you're hiding things or suppressing them at all.
Right.
You don't even want people to know the document exists.
Right.
And so all that is a pattern of deception.
Yes, they would see it as justified in helping you to maintain faith because you may not have as much faith as them. So to support the weaker brother, we just would be better to keep that out of their knowledge, and they won't have to grapple with that little bit of history.
Right. Still in their minds, maybe good intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that decision to not make it a hit piece, I can speculate as to different reasons why. One may be they don't want to offend believers. Maybe they've got family and friends that are believers still. Maybe, they don't want to hurt their reputation for whatever things they may want to be able to do in Utah or with Mormons. And then there's also the idea that it's just strategic, that it's just smart to not create something that can so easily be branded as anti-Mormon, that the church won't feel like it needs to attack, but that it's neutral enough and fair enough to where then members feel like it's safe enough to watch. And I have no idea. I think Tyler and Jerald just want to tell a good story. But if we're talking about, let's say that you and I have the intention of as many Mormons as possible, learning as much of the true history as possible so that they can come to accurate conclusions about what the church is and isn't, so that they can then make more informed decisions about their life. Let's say that that's my motivation and yours. Is it smartest to do a neutral, objective documentary, or is it smartest to do more of a hit piece? Do you have an opinion on that?
I think it would help to neutralize the effectiveness of Mormon missionaries. I think that the average non-Mormon watching it would have sufficient reason to think that the Mormon church looked like kind of a kooky outfit, that, that's all interesting, but view them as like the Amish or something. They're oddballs out there in the desert and not something I'd want to talk to the missionaries about joining. So,
Are you saying if it had been harder hitting?
I think that's what it accomplishes where it's at. That, now I've lost my thought. Okay, if you make it too hard hitting, it's obviously just slanted, and people can easily dismiss it. By having it be neutral, it still has the effect of keeping people from being interested in joining without it being blatant about it. I think the only ones that are come away from it excited in a positive way from it would be a Mormon that has no clue what the documentary was really about. They just saw people say it's all true and and just say, okay, that was an interesting part of church history, and just move on. But I think the average person with no history of Mormonism viewing it would not be drawn to invite the missionaries in to think of joining the Mormon Church.
Right. Okay. And what do you guess? Let's say the average, let's just say thoughtful, educated Mormon along the Wasatch Front or elsewhere, who, is believing, and they're just curious, and so they start watching it. Do you feel like it potentially poses some challenges to their faith?
It could, depending on how important it is for them, for Mormonism to be true. Depending on how important that is going to depend on what parts of it you pick up on. I think if you've had any doubts, if you'd been exposed to some friend that had some problem areas, even if there'd been just little bits here and there, I think it would be enough to make you want to know more and go Google salamander letter or something like that, and could easily open the door for reading further books and taking you down that trail to apostasy. If you really want to believe Mormonism, I think you'll just pass it off as an obscure part of our history. Too bad, a couple of people died, blip in the screen, and move on.
Yeah. Were you surprised to see Turley interviewed for it?
Oh, no, not when I saw they used so much KSL footage.
Yeah.
Because I think that would have made Turley feel safe. I don't know which came first, but I would assume that Turley would feel safe in being interviewed if the church had given them the okay to use footage from their own broadcasting system. So, no, putting the two together, I thought, okay, I don't know what kind of deal was worked out on this, but obviously the church feels comfortable having him interviewed.
What were your reactions to Turley's parts in the documentary?
Well, the one I remember is him saying why we didn't need to think that the prophet could discern this. I don't remember the other parts he said, but Turley's a real nice guy. His job is to defend the church. And that's been all the historians. That's your job, is to put the story out in a way that the members feel comfortable with it and can accept it.
I would never want to be one to correct Sandra Tanner, and I'm not actually correcting you, but I'm just going to say something that I just learned that I think is really interesting, and that may be obvious to everyone who's listening, but I don't think it is to everyone. I was listening to Turley being interviewed recently on a podcast called All In, which is this podcast put out by the church to promote faith. And they interview him and they talk about how he became church historian. And he tells the story of how he was always interested in church history, but how he didn't think there was money in it. So he went to law school, and he graduated from BYU Law School and was working for a law firm. And when totally out of the blue, Oakes reaches out to his law firm and says, hey, we need to meet with Turley. Oakes and Turley meet, I think, over soup. And Oakes says, I want to bring you on as like assistant church historian when he had no formal training as a historian at all. And what that sort of like made me realize again in my mind is he's not really a historian. Now, of course, you could say you and Jerald weren't historians or Juanita Brooks weren't historians because you can do good history and not have that training. What are you wanting to say? I know you're wanting to say
no,
something.
that's true.
But it should be a huge red flag to Mormons everywhere. Turley, Marlin Jensen, Elder Snow, former heads of the church history department, what do they all have in common? What are they? Sandra
Lawyers.
Tanner? And what are they not? No, say it again. What are they?
They are lawyers.
And what are they not?
Church official historians.
Like, what does that mean? Think about that, dear listener, that when the church wants the head of its history departments, post Leonard Arrington, it's choosing lawyers and not historians. Think about that. What does that tell you? What does that tell you, Sandra Tanner?
That you have to know how to defend your client and frame everything in the best possible way to get an innocent verdict.
Yeah. I mean, there's this book I read once called Mistakes Were Made, But Not by Me. Have you heard of that book?
I've heard the title. Yeah.
And it basically makes this argument, and I'm sure this isn't original to the book. It makes this argument that there's no correlation between high intelligence and whether you believe or not. And in fact, oftentimes having a high intelligence, because we arrive at our conclusions emotionally and then just use, unless we're Jerald or, others, and then use what we most often do as humans is we arrive at our decisions and conclusions emotionally, and then we just use the evidence to support our position. And lawyers are a type of person that are just extra good at justifying whatever needs to get justified. So it's not a matter of, sometimes intelligence can make you more likely to believe because you're more skilled at justifying. And that's why the church hires lawyers as the heads of their history department. That's my little theory. What do you think about that?
Also along those lines, in my younger years, I thought lawyers were all trained to tell the truth. And what I have come to realize, no, lawyers are all trained to how to frame the argument for their truth. And these men are trained to construct an argument for their case, not necessarily laying out neutrally all the evidence.
Yeah.
And if you're good at how to put together your pieces of evidence, that's what gets you to be church historian, not the fact that you know all the evidence.
Exactly. And another instance of this, as I was studying, again, one of Jerald's books, was Dallin H. Oakes's justification for why the salamander letter was not a problem. Like he just very quickly was able to give some type of talk, I think, to church educators, where he's like likening Moroni to an angel that has protection that wouldn't be burned by fire, and a salamander is like an angel, and so it could have been replaceable with Moroni. And it's this huge construct of Oakes using his brilliant lawyerly mind to frame all the evidence in a way that would still be able to sustain faith, when literally he's making it up against a bunch of stuff that had been forged and faked. And it's just I think it's along with that 1835 Josiah Stoll, Joseph Smith letter, that Oakes justification of the salamander letter, to me, represents one of the most important smoking guns, along with Hinckley, buying and hiding and lying, about the
Right.
1835 document. What do you have any thoughts about Oakes?
Another lawyer.
Right?
And if I was on a criminal case, I'd want him for my lawyer.
Exactly. Even if you were guilty,
If
right?
I was guilty, especially.
Especially if you were guilty. So, but does it Turley come off as like guy smiley, happy guy?
Oh, yeah.
Is super friendly and warm and
Yeah, and I think he probably is, but he also has to come up with a certain answer. And his job is to make all those square pegs fit in those round holes.
yeah.
And if we stamp hard enough, they're going to go in.
Yeah. Well, all of this was to explore the question. A lot of on Ex-Mormon Reddit, I saw these things that are like, I'm not going to watch Among the Mormons because Jerald Hess is an active believing Mormon. And these guys were bought off by the church and it's not a truly historical thing. Like putting aside Tyler's faith or Jerald's faith, or even, the church's involvement. The big question I'm asking you is, was it smart for them not to do a hit piece? With whatever goals people like you and I might have, was it probably smart for them to do a balanced, non-hit piece of a work, in Sandra Tanner's opinion?
That's a good question. Because I think a stronger piece would have gotten them more viewership.
A more hard-hitting piece?
A more hard-hitting piece, I think, would have got more viewership, but it also would have got harsher criticism from the media and news makers, the filmmakers, and that would have seen it as a certain type of film, as a more sleazy kind of way of doing legitimate theater, or a real documentary. There's a certain elitist kind of approach to mine as a balanced film, as opposed to these guys are just doing a quick hit piece. And so I think the sensational sells well. But I think in the long run, they've made a piece that has longer shelf life, that in the long run, it will have more credibility, more people will watch it because people aren't sure if it was good or bad. But I think they brought out a lot of good points, even though it wasn't as harsh as I would have liked to have seen it.
So whether or not it was as harsh as you would have liked to have seen it, you're acknowledging that there's not that they're conniving at all.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, I just think Jerald and Tyler like to tell good stories. But you're saying that it's a fair argument can be made that even if they wanted to, awaken people more or educate people more or even harm the church or take the church down, whatever, there's a case to be made that a smarter decision is to write a more neutral piece. You're saying that's a reasonable case can be made.
Right. I could have probably been able to justify a little more hard hitting.
Okay.
It still accomplished what I hope the current one does. But they wouldn't have got KSL footage.
Right. Yeah.
So I think there was a trade-off there that to get all that footage, you had to be more neutral. And I think the piece as a historical preservation of the story, it's important to have those news clips. So if it was me making it and I had to make that trade-off, I would have thought, we probably want the news clips.
Okay. All right. Well, that's Sandra Tanner's endorsement of your approach. Whatever your motives were, Jerald and Tyler, that's Sandra Tanner's endorsement of your approach. Somewhat.
Yeah. I liked it.
Yeah. All right. So other reactions to the documentary?
Well, I've had different people already texting me of saying, I was watching that the other day, and all of a sudden, Sandra Tanner popped up in there. I didn't know you were part of that story. So that's been kind of fun. Even at church Sunday, I had some people come up to me and say, I had no clue that you were going to be in that. I was just watching that. And people that from my Christian audience, there are people out there that I go to church with that have no idea what I do. I have a little bookstore that talks about Mormonism. I mean, they just have no clue about what we've been involved with. So they were real surprised to suddenly see me pop up. I've had people that I haven't had contact for a long time write me and say, what a shock and voice from the past to suddenly see their old friend on this TV series. So it's brought me in contact with people that I wouldn't have had contact with probably otherwise.
How's that been for you to have people reach out to you?
That's been fun. It's been good to connect with different ones that I knew back in the 80s that I've lost touch with. They said, oh my goodness, I remember that. I was there that day the bomb went off or whatever. So, and I would say that most of the people that have emailed me and written to me have had a positive response to the video. I'm trying to think. I don't think I had.
In terms of liking it, being entertaining, finding it interesting?
As far as like not feeling it hit the church hard enough.
Anything. And no, just enjoyment.
Most of them enjoyed the video.
Yeah.
And we're happy with it and satisfied with the telling of the story.
Yeah.
So.
Like, and again, I'm not, this is just my opinion, but if I'm thinking about Jerald and Tyler, yeah, you can write a documentary for like ex-Mormons or liberal Mormons, but how big is that audience? Like if you want to, like if I'm a filmmaker, I want to make a piece of art that reaches the most, if I'm a storyteller, I want to reach as many people as possible. And who really cares about whether the Mormon church hid documents or obstructed a case a little bit when he still got convicted? Like, I could see a lot of the stuff that ex-Mormons or progressive Mormons would want to see in the documentary feel like insider baseball, not interesting, prolonging the story, not really contributing to it in significant ways. And sometimes the art of a good story is more about what you cut out than what you leave in. And so I could see that the story could easily get bogged down with stuff that ex-Mormons want that would prevent it from being an interesting, compelling, gripping story for everyone else in the world. Can you see that? You probably made that point earlier.
To bring out the different points that I would have liked to have seen mentioned would have extended another hour, another session. And I'm not sure that a 4-part series would have been as popular. I don't know that the outside world would care 4 sessions worth for the story.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And Netflix only approved 3 hours, and
That's
they probably
why.
did that because it's smart.
Yeah.
And so, there's wisdom. I think there's probably a lot of wisdom in that.
Right.
Yeah. And I bet Tyler and Jerald had to show a lot of restraint to tell a good story at the expense of whatever personal agendas they may or may not have had. And they're different people too.
Well, I think they would have felt bad because they had so many great interviews with everyone that I'm sure they felt bad they had to cut out. I mean, you can't take hours worth of interviews with all the people that surrounded Mark Hofmann and not feel bad and not being able to use them.
How many hours were you interviewed?
Oh, I don't know, several. I'm not sure. I lost track.
More than this interview?
At this point, no, probably not more than this. But
it's hard to be John DeLynn in length of interviews, Jerald and Tyler. I got you at least on one score.
But they would have done hours. I think Shannon Flynn said they did a lot more hours with him.
Mm-hmm. How do you know that? How do you know that?
It was on the Sunstone panel discussion
last night
okay. That they did. Shannon mentioned.
He wasn't on, though. Shannon wasn't in that panel.
Well, where would I have seen him interviewed? Huh.
It doesn't matter.
Anyways, it seemed like that Shannon somewhere said that he was interviewed for hours.
Okay. And you were interviewed for hours.
Yeah.
Isn't it, and I've already heard them answer this question, but isn't it a super bummer that whenever some documentarians interview 20, 30, 40 people for hours and hours, that all that footage gets thrown away and never used or archived? Wouldn't it be amazing if from now on, all documentarians both publish their final cut, but then for the geeks and the fans, even sold access to all the original interviews, or just made transcripts of the original source interviews, so all of those amazing interviews don't get wasted and lost and thrown away and never accessed?
Well, I would like to see them donate the at least audio of the recordings of all of the people they interviewed to, like, the University of Utah Special Collections. I think all of those interviews are valuable, and I would hope that they would be preserved somewhere. I mean, we're all getting to a point where we're dying off.
How old are you?
I'm 80.
You're 80.
Yes, and so how long are the rest of the people besides me going to be around? Even though, like, Shannon Flynn's younger than me, I don't know just how much, but Shannon has bad health.
Yeah.
And Brent's had some surgeries lately. So you don't know how long any of us are going to be around.
Yeah.
They need to preserve those interviews. They're valuable pieces of history. So a shout out to them. Save them somewhere. I hope they're donated to the University of Utah.
I'll ask them. Donate footage, even just the transcripts,
the audio,
right?
Or the audio of the recordings. Well, yeah, a minimum a transcript, but I would think the audios would be so important historically.
I wonder if Netflix owns all that and basically would say that's ours because we paid, or BBC or whoever it was. I wonder if.
Yeah, it depends on who paid for the interviews, I guess.
Because I asked for the same thing with Helen Whitney when she did the PBS series on the Mormons.
Yeah.
And I got the sense she didn't own her own footage, that PBS owned it or whoever.
Yeah.
So she couldn't use it.
Might be. That would be a shame if it's not saved somewhere.
Yeah. Can you imagine all those stories that were on the cutting room floor?
Yes.
Okay. Other reactions. So overall, you've appreciated this kind of revival of the story and your part in it, and the feedback you've heard. That's all been fun and positive.
Yes, that's all been positive.
And a little bit validating. Do you feel a little bit vindicated or validated?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, I'm glad to have the story revived because we've got all these people that have born since 1985 that don't even know who Mark Hofmann is.
I know.
And so they have no idea about the story at all or the framework of the thing. So I thought it was good to reintroduce the story and to revive the knowledge of how Mormon history has been handled in the last 50 years. It gives some context to the people have no idea today what it was like before the internet.
What was it like, Sandra? Tell us.
Well, when I had to ride my donkey to church, but to be without the internet and without cell phones or any of that kind of thing, to how the world worked at that time, how hard it was to do investigative reporting, how hard it was for the police to do the investigations they were doing, to try to piece together the story, to find the sales receipts and all these things that are part of the Mark Hofmann evidence in a day when you didn't have electronic capturing of all the data.
Yeah.
To find out where he traveled when you don't have cell phones that you can trace the locations and pinging off the towers and all those things, the cross point where he parked his car, that it was a lot more intensive to do research then. And the whole police investigation would have been slowed down because of that lack of technology. I mean, in today's world, so much of that could have been done faster.
Yeah.
They would have loved to have our technology at that time.
But to their credit,
they got the job done. And I'm amazed at what they were able to put together before technology.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. So other reactions.
Nope, I guess not.
No, that's it? Wait, I've got a couple questions.
Okay.
Can I ask you some questions?
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to just name, okay, you do feel like the church got off easy, that they could have, I think I heard you already say this, that the church they could have covered more the ways the church hid information, lied about things, tried to buy things off, and obstructed the investigation.
And I would have liked to have seen a little more of that because I think it was part of the story, and you couldn't just say it was an attack on the church. I think it was an important part of telling the story. So I felt bad that wasn't explained better. But with a constraint of 3 hours, I understand what they're up against, but I would have liked to have seen more clarity on how the church reacted to the documents and how they dealt with them.
Any other big parts of the story that you think were really missing other than what you've mentioned so far?
Oh, probably. My mind's gone blank.
Okay. No big emotional. Was there anything about it that made you like angry or really sad? Like when you're thinking about your emotional reactions to the documentary, things that made you angry or sad or really happy?
I felt the ending interviews with, Shannon, Brent Ashworth, and Kurt Bench, all of them, to bring in the personal touch of them being friends with Mark. And although not much was said about Kathy Sheets, but to make the victims more a part of the story, I thought was good. And to see the impact the whole thing had on these people personally, I thought was very moving.
In what way?
Well, how they were betrayed and used by a trusted friend, and what they went through in trying to reconcile all of that afterwards. And Brent's struggle with feeling personal guilt because he had introduced Mark and Steve Christensen to each other, and feeling in a sense that he felt some sort of guilt in leading to Christensen's death, that it wouldn't have happened had he not introduced him to Mark. I thought gave a personal feeling of focusing the crime back to what it cost in human lives, not just that whether a church bought some documents or whether they were authentic or not. I thought that was very good to pay homage in that sense to the victims, because they are an important part of the story. And I think it's easy to get focused on the mechanics of the documents and all of that and forget that it did cost two people their lives. So I thought it was a very powerful ending, and I think everyone walked away feeling great empathy for Brent in his struggle. Brent Metcalf, yeah.
What did you feel towards Brent specifically?
I felt very sorrowful for him, and I didn't know Christensen at all, and never met Kathy Sheets, and only knew Mark in a very limited way in the bookstore discussing church history. So it was not any personal struggle for me on who was guilty or not guilty. I think adding the human dimension to it all was needed for respect for those that died.
Yeah. And the victims of, like you said, the friends who were betrayed and used, some of them probably were never the same
Right.
after that.
Yes. Well, they said it in the video, I think some of them said that maybe it was Brent last night on the interview he did talking about it was very hard to trust anyone again, that the long period he went through of ever trusting again after that, to be so betrayed by a close personal friend to such a degree, it just was shattering for him.
Okay, so that made you feel moved and sad.
Oh, yeah. It just brought me to tears watching Brent give those closing comments.
At the end of the doc.
At the end of the documentary. Yeah. And it was good for me because I needed to be reminded that these things affect people personally. It isn't just academic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other emotional reactions? Anything made you angry or happy?
Well, I was really taken back with the young man saying he gave Mark a blessing and commanded him to live. And I thought, oh, that is so Mormon.
Yeah. And kind of sweet, right?
Yes. But sort of naive in a sense, but
yeah.
heartfelt.
This is a really sensitive question, I think, and it's one that I want you to just say, I don't want to talk about that, or I don't want to answer it, or I don't like the question. But I know that some of the listeners would have been thinking these questions, and so I just want to see if you have any reaction to it. There has to be listeners or viewers of the documentary that are wondering who else could have been an accomplice, if anyone else could have been an accomplice to Mark. And I think probably of all the characters, Shannon Flynn maybe evoked in the viewers that kind of question, because the documentary's got Mark and Flynn. It's got Flynn with the anarchist cookbook, a bomb-making book. It's got Flynn and Hofmann going off and shooting Uzis in the desert, blowing things up. And it kind of leaves you wondering. And also, I guess Shannon Flynn is saying in the documentary, I don't remember if I saw him the night before or not. And you're like, really? You don't remember? And of course, memory, we all forget stuff all the time. I don't remember what I did this morning. So like, I'm not condemning anyone, but I'm just saying there are probably people wondering what Shannon Flynn's involvement could have been with some of the more sinister stuff, or if there were other potential accomplices. Do you have any thoughts or reactions on that?
Well, this is one part of the film of the story that was left out of the film, and that's Mark's associate, Lynn Jacobs.
Yeah.
And
we talked about
he
that
never
earlier.
gets mentioned in the film at all. And Lynn was a close friend of Mark and helped him with selling some of his documents. And Lynn, to me, came across as very shrewd, intelligent, creative. I could easily have seen Lynn as a co-conspirator with Mark. The police never found a direct link of anything that would lead them financially to see Lynn as helping Mark. Lynn's now dead, so we can't ask him anything. But Shannon...
And listeners, if you didn't listen to my first part with Sandra, apparently Lynn Jacobs died of AIDS.
Yes.
And that's why he's no longer with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you can hear more about Sandra talk about Lynn Jacobs in the previous interview if you haven't listened. But keep going.
So then when you have Shannon Flynn, that's another one that was very close in. Yes, it raises the questions, could he have been a co-conspirator? I see Shannon as more of a wannabe. He wanted to be in a part of something exciting, and so joined a joiner, not a leader. So I don't know that I would have seen him as the creative co-conspirator on inventing the documents. So no, I never thought of Shannon in the sense of helping create the handwriting forgeries, that type of thing. Maybe I'm selling him short, but he just didn't impress me as someone who was shrewd enough or informed enough for that job.
Maybe more of a stooge, not in a rude way.
No, just a groupie.
Yeah, right.
He wanted to be part of the group.
Right. Yeah, it gives that impression a little bit that he just wanted to be cool a little bit. Do you see the Hofmann story having kind of good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains? And if so, who are the heroes and who are the villains?
Well, Mark's obviously the villain. Jerald was, I guess, one of the heroes in that he questioned the document, but I guess the real heroes of the story are the detectives that just, and the forensic guys, that they just kept at it. And we haven't even mentioned much of Throckmorton, the document guy that figured out that the ink was artificially aged because it cracked under high magnification. That was an amazing find, and that broke the case to prove the frauds. I think that Throckmorton was convinced all along the documents were forgeries since the bombing, since he was brought in to examine them. I think he was sure they were frauds, but how do you prove it in court? And Mark was very shrewd. He would go to the libraries and cut out end sheets of old books so that the paper would be from the right time frame. And I think he even checked where they were published to make sure the end paper would be paper that could have been had in New York. And then he made up ink according to old ink formulas. So those things all checked out initially. So Throckmorton had to find some way to test his documents beyond the obvious of the ink and paper, because Mark had thought that part through. And what got him was artificially aging the documents to make them look old, was finding out that the ink cracked when you did that. So in a sense, Throckmorton is the hero. If he hadn't have been able to proven to a court the documents were frauds, the whole thing would have just passed over the documents. They would have just been left as genuine, and Mark would have just been a murderer that killed because he couldn't produce as much of a collection to people he owed money to.
Right.
And so in that sense, Throckmorton is the hero because we had to have that last bit of proof that forensically the documents were not what they claimed to be.
Yeah. Any other heroes come to mind?
Oh, that's the main things that come to my mind.
Okay. How about villains? Any other villains?
Well, the church, I guess, in the sense that
How so?
If they hadn't have been trying to control their history, all of this would have never happened.
Yeah, how so?
Well, if they'd have been telling the truth all along, they wouldn't have had documents to hide. They wouldn't have had given Mark an incentive to create false documents. He created them because he knew the church was controlling their history and not fessing up to the early embarrassing
Misleading
things.
people.
So they created the environment that made Mark's documents possible.
They provided Mark with a motive to do the forgeries,
Right.
and with an environment that would value and purchase documents.
Right.
The whole market.
Right.
They would have created if they just had a history of just publishing any historical document, that comes out. There wouldn't have even been a market for it. So Mark wouldn't have had any incentive to forge and then try and sell and make a living off of it. You've already talked about the front, the Christensen and others as the front person. You want to talk about that and how there's some culpability there that ends up costing Christensen his life? I'm not
sure
trying to lead the witness. Well, I guess I'm just saying that we've already discussed in the prior episode the church's habit of number one, giving everyone the impression that they have the gift of discernment, so it makes people feel safe.
Right.
But then also never wanting to be the ones that are
Yeah.
investigating and purchasing the documents.
Right. Yes. The church has traditionally used front people to buy documents for them, to either donate them or keep them in their own possession, but to keep them out of the public eye and to give the church deniability of ownership. So, so like with Christensen on the McClellan collection, they are trying to keep everything out of the press to keep it as hush-hush as possible. So they call in a trusted person to authenticate the documents that will not tell about seeing them, that will keep the secrets of what's in the box. And they felt they could trust Christensen to do that.
So in that sense, I interpret that as putting Christensen in harm's way. Not intentionally,
But yes, they did. Right. When they made him be the one that has to verify the collection, that made him be the target for Mark.
And then when you add to that the fact that they're supposed to have the gift of discernment,
Yes.
they're working directly with Mark. They should have known.
Yeah.
And then they put Christensen in harm's way with Mark. I mean, I don't want to be the one that's always trying to like stick it to the church and make them look bad, but is it fair? Do you think it's fair to say the church has, I don't want to say blood on its hands, but culpability here?
Yes. They set up a scenario for the whole frauds to even happen, but then they were responsible for the way it played out. Their own actions created a situation and environment where Christensen was put in harm's way. And I fault them for claiming the gift of being prophets and yet not having the ability to see through Mark at the cost of two people's lives. That had they had the gift of discernment, those two people would still be alive today.
And also just having other people do your dirty work for you. If you're going to do dirty work, do it yourself and own up to it. Don't get other people to do your dirty work, right?
Right.
Is that fair?
I think so.
Okay. And then, and again, I'm not trying to pile on the church, but then there's the obstruction of the investigation, non-cooperation with and or obstruction. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, yes, they could have made the whole thing easier on the prosecuting attorneys if they had been more open with their own research of their vaults and their information. We know Hinckley misrepresented things to the investigators about his meetings with Mark and what they had purchased. So all along the way, there were cases of obstruction of justice from my point of view. And there was at least one of the detectives that lost his faith in Mormonism because of being involved in the interviews of the general authorities and realizing he was being gaslighted, that they were not telling him the truth. They were holding back information. And here he had trusted these men as prophets of God, and then to realize they were holding back information on a murder investigation was just totally disillusioning to him.
Where do we read more about that and who that was?
I don't know that it would be written up in any of the books. It might be in Gathering of Saints by Lindsay.
Who? Lindsay?
That's the last name. What was his first name? Robert Lindsay.
Okay.
He was a New York Times reporter for the religion department here in the West, and he wrote the book Gathering of Saints, I think was the title.
And in there he talks about Hofmann?
It's all on Hofmann. And I think in his book, he tells about one of the detectives losing faith. But we also probably got some of that from Ken Farnsworth, one of the detectives who didn't have faith in Mormonism, was ex-Mormon. He's now dead, but we had a lot of conversations with him afterwards, and it may have partly come through him. But I think that in Lindsay's book on Mark Hofmann that he might tell some of that.
What are the What are the books that you're aware of about the Hofmann bombings, and which ones do you like and really recommend?
The three main ones is Salamander by Sillitoe and Roberts, which has a lot of the forensic stuff by Throckmorton at the back.
So that's good?
It's a good story. Then Robert Lindsay's Gathering of Saints.
So that's one of the three main ones.
Yes, one of the three.
Do you
I
recommend
liked
that?
it the best. And it had the least distribution. I don't know why their publisher didn't do more editions of it, because the other two stayed in print more. But Gathering of Saints I thought was really good. And then Nafee and Smith did the Mormon Murders, and they were two New York attorneys. And theirs is a little more sensationally told. And so it has a little more of the, I don't know, anti-Mormon flair. But
Did you like that book?
I liked Lindsay's book better.
Right.
I think that the Mormon Murders by Nafee and Smith is more exciting to read.
Like Brody.
Well, no, not like Brody, like E.D. Howe or whatever.
Okay.
No, it's more the popular kind of book you'd get at the grocery store or airport. It was, I think it was big seller at the airports. Because it's engrossing telling of the story, very dramatic and all. It's a little grittier, a little more critical. So it's a lot of historians didn't like it because it was
Hyperbolic or
a little
sensationalistic.
too sensationalistic, they felt.
What did you love about Lindsay's Gathering of
I
the
felt
Saints
he was
most?
very fair and yet critical of the church for its handling of things. I thought he was a little more direct on some of the problem areas the church posed in the whole thing. I thought Roberts and Sillitoe were a little kinder to the church, but very good book. But I thought Lindsay's was dealt a little more with the duplicity of the church.
Okay.
So if you're grading them, the Sillitoe's I guess would be considered the most favorable to the church, if you can call it that. And then would be Lindsay's book, and then the Mormon's Murders was the famous paperback.
And then, of course, we're not mentioning Turley's Victims, right?
The Turley's Victims book that came out later, yeah.
And your thought about that book?
I felt the whole point of that book was to, in the middle, tell you that they already had the McClellan collection, to get that out so that the church could say they printed the information before it came out in some salacious thing by the Tanners.
No. Literally, you think that's why they did the book?
Yeah, I think that they wanted to get in print that they owned up to having the McClellan diaries, so that if it came out later that they had it, that they went on record saying they had it, so that it couldn't be written up later as a proof of them hiding documents.
But
But
maybe,
of course, and Jerald did we did Tracking the White Salamander, which never gets listed by anybody as one of the books on Mark Hofmann, but we did our book first before anyone did.
is that a good one?
I think it's good. Yeah, you can read it right online free, Tracking the White Salamander on our website.
Is it still in print?
Yeah, it's still in print too.
How do you get it?
You order it from Utah Lighthouse Ministry. Just Google
You
Utah.
have printed copies of it right now?
I got one right here.
Of the book?
Yep.
Show it to us.
Tracking the White Salamander.
And people can buy that from you right now?
Yep.
How do you make new ones if you sell them all out?
We print up some more.
You print them yourself?
We got our own press. Yeah.
Where is it?
In the back room at the ministry.
Really?
Yeah. We do all this ourselves.
So that's one way people can support Sandra Tanner.
Yep.
Freaking by tracking the white salamander and give her money because she deserves support.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So those are 5 books if people want to read more.
Right.
I wish all these books had audiobooks because that's my preferred way of consuming a book. And none of these books, as far as I know, have audiobooks, and including yours.
Oh, our stuff would be so hard to do audiobooks. So you got all these long quotes. It would take forever to read them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really good to get your review on those books. I think for future historians and researchers, that will be useful. So if we had to kind of bring this to a close, is there anything else you want to say about Ashworth or Metcalf or Bench or any of the other players that were mentioned?
No, I feel sorry for all of them because the whole thing was costly to each of them in different ways. For Jerald and I, it was just a part of our historical research. It didn't impact us personally like the rest of these people. And I thought the video was good in that it brought out the human element, that this crime was not just a matter of paper documents, that the personal side of the story was very tragic.
So if you had to kind of conclude with your assessment of the legacy of Mark Hofmann and the bombings, what its impact has been on the church, its members, in history, how would you summarize that?
I think the Mark Hofmann story, as it was written up in the paperback books that came out in the late 80s, had a major impact on people leaving the church.
Really?
Absolutely. After the different books came out on Hofmann, we had people just pouring into the bookstore, calling on the phone, writing us letters, that when they read those books, that they just felt so betrayed and angry, hurt, that they had invested all this time, energy, sacrificing with their families to live Mormonism, only to find out that the brethren had been deliberately withholding information from them. So yes, it was a major watershed event, as far as I was concerned, of people flooding to our doors. People that said to me, I never paid attention to you before. I always thought the church was right. You were just a couple of angry apostates making up lies against the church. And I suddenly realized that it was the other way around. So I think it was a major factor in Mormonism through that period. Now it's died off now by this time.
Isn't that amazing how it can die off and now be forgotten? Yeah,
35 years later and it's almost forgotten. But at the time, it was like an earthquake. It really had an impact on the Mormon community when not just the bombings, that had an impact, just the events of the day. But when the story was written up and people read about it, they were just appalled that they never knew this part of church history. They never knew why someone would make up documents like that until they realized the church had been hiding its history. Yeah. And it was devastating.
Yeah. I'm just really curious about this now that you mentioned it. As I think back of just my lifetime, I was not paying attention to the Hofmann stuff because I was still in high school and I was in Texas and I was not plugged in. But since going to BYU, I lived through, the September 6th. I lived through, Gail Houston and David Knowlton and Cecilia Farr getting kicked out of BYU. I lived through, my own excommunication, obviously, Jeremy Runnels, the CES letter, the emergence of Mormon Stories Podcast, obviously, the emergence of the CES letter. And then
the Madsons. Hans Madsen.
Hans and Brigitte Madsen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Of course. And then Kate Kelly and Ordained Women. And there's Prop 8. And then there's the November 2015 policy and the reversal. Is the Hofmann the biggest watershed moment you ever saw?
Yes.
But
absolutely.
Compared
to all of those.
Really?
Yes.
In terms of flooding people to your doors?
Yes. It was a very tumultuous time, and it reverberated for years after the bombings. As long as the different books were available, it just was a continual rolling flood of people, letters, emails, whatever, of people putting the pieces together and realizing that the history of the church was not what they were raised to believe. And I still get people now writing me letters apologizing for saying bad things about me back then. That say, sorry, you were right. I want to apologize.
And they mistreated you at the time or
said bad things about me.
Yeah. How does it feel to be vindicated?
Oh, well, it's fun to get the letters. It's nice to have someone write and say, I'm sorry I called you a harlot.
Well, that's it's weird because like Marlon Jensen was quoted and I actually had the recording get made that recorded Marlon Jensen saying at Utah State University, where I was living at the time, that the church was going through its greatest apostasy then, and this would have been in 2012, 2013 timeframe, that the church was experiencing its biggest apostasy then than since Kirtland. Mm-hmm. He didn't mention the Mark Hofmann bombings as that time. He said it was kind of 2013, 2014 timeframe. So
but he would have the stats from the church to look at. I'm talking about what came in the papers, that it was just month after month of stories on Hofmann and the whole case and the books and all. It just generated talk and publications for years afterwards, so that at least my contacts would say that was a more important event than any of the other events, at least in my experience. But I don't have their stats to compare the 85 to 90 time period as opposed to the 2010 to 2015 numbers. Right. So I don't know what the percentage would show.
Yeah, like I have so many questions. So like, so when you think about the church eventually, denouncing Dialogue and Sunstone, taking its CES people out of those forums, and then excommunicating the September 6th, do you feel like those things, that the Hofmann, in some way, the Hofmann stuff leads to the church cracking down on intellectuals and Sunstone and Dialogue?
Sure.
They got tougher about all that?
Well, yeah, they had such a, I'm sure, a huge amount of people contacting them about what is the problem here on church history? Why did all of this happen? Why didn't I know about these things? That they're trying to figure out how to put the feathers back in the pillow. And we don't want any more feathers coming out of that thing. So they kept getting rips in the fabric, and they were sewing them up as fast as they found them. But at this point, there's so many feathers out there, there's no way to pull it back. That's why now we get this spin that, well, there doesn't have to be plates. That can be revelation. And, he didn't really need the papyri. It was just a catalyst to getting a revelation.
On the Book of Abraham.
On the Book of Abraham. Yeah. And so they've...
And the stone in the hat.
The stone. Oh, yes, we're so proud. I don't know if you've seen Nelson's little video with the lady that's, what is she, the head of primary or whatever, interviews him. And he's sitting there in New York, proudly pointing to Joseph Smith's hat on the table. And he even picks it up and shows us how he put it up to his face to get the translation of the Book of Mormon.
See, the church is transparent.
They don't show him put his head in the hat, though. They cannot bring themselves to get that strong on the illustration. They've gotten to where they can show the hat, and Nelson came the closest by pulling it up towards his face, but he didn't really put his face in the hat. They're not quite to that point yet.
When apologists now point to the church's recent conversion to transparency, whether it's Rough Stone Rolling or the Joe Smith Papers Project or the essays, or, even Russell and Nelson's acknowledgement of a stone and a hat. When apologists point to that and say, see, the church is transparent. You having been in this business 60 years, what's your reaction?
They've been drugged to the point by the hair all the way uphill to get them to come to the top of the hill and say, okay, we're going to tell the story like it really happened. But I don't think they're at the top of the hill yet. I think they're still being drug up there, and they're getting more transparent and more open. But they keep holding back. They can't quite get it's like holding on to all the money in the cookie jar, and you don't want to let go of the money to get your hand out, because you lose it all. So they've come a long way. It's amazing what they admit.
Are you proud
now.
of them for doing that?
I don't know if I'd say proud. I mean, it was a lot of sweat and tears to get them to the point of admitting all those things. But they aren't there yet, and they want to make it out like they're so open. Well, I think the publishing of the Joseph Smith Papers is a wonderful thing, and I think that's to their credit. I'm glad to see them putting all the documents out there.
Not all.
But what they have put out has been very praiseworthy. However, most Mormons don't know there's the Joseph Smith Paper Project. They don't even know that's the church site. If I give a Mormon a photo off the Joseph Smith Papers, they want to ask me if it's church approved.
Yeah.
They don't accept it as being, well, it's just the historians. That doesn't prove it's official. Who do you think owns the Joseph Smith Papers Project? So the fact that it's a different set of people and website than the church official site gives a Mormon the ability to distance themselves from it. If they didn't read about it in the church magazine, it's not true. I even have pushback on showing people the essays because it didn't come from the president of the church, and they aren't even sure that's authentic. But even when the church does the essays, there is a holding back of full disclosure. There's 2/3 disclosure, but not full disclosure. They just can't quite bring themselves to just say things straight out, unadorned, the way it happened.
Yeah, it goes back to that framing, that lawyerly apologetic framing. Yeah. But it really goes back to this idea of the third rail, the line that's too far is admitting fraud, right?
Yes, but Joseph Smith set the agenda and showed them how to do it at the very beginning when he told his own story, and he did that himself. Yes, I worked for Stoll, but I was only pushing the shovel. I worked for that guy, but I wasn't really doing the magic stuff down there for him. He's framing everything in a way to excuse his actions and not give a clear story of what's really happening.
Joseph did that.
Joseph Smith set the agenda of lying for the Lord, of selective evidence, of framing the story in a way that leads to faith, not to question, so that he all his life lies about polygamy. And now the church has had to own up to all of that, but they still can't quite bring themselves to even face what all of the story is for the polygamy. The way the essays do a softer telling of the story, that obviously he's grooming these young girls and then proposing them and putting spiritual manipulation, friendship manipulation to get these girls to submit. And yet they can frame it in this supposed faith-promoting way. It just troubles me on Joseph's telling of his history, the church's telling of his history. Everything is sugar-coated. Now, they aren't putting quite as much sugar on it as they used to, but there's still a veneer of sugar on there.
Yeah. And so on the one hand, you could say it's Joseph's fault. He set up the practice of deception.
Yes.
And so the church is just, if he's of God, then deception must be justifiable. But you have to think that some of these historians at church headquarters would say at some level, this is not honest, this is not fair. Or even some of the general authorities would say this is not ethical. And yet we almost never have defections of insiders. How do you make sense of that?
Because you don't get your retirement if you defect. And unfortunately, that is one of the holds they have on people. If you work at BYU, if you drop out of the church, you lose your retirement. If you're church historian and you apostatize, you lose your entire
Are you
retirement.
Sure? Can they do that? Can they take your retirement?
Not after you retire, but up to the point of retiring, they can fire you and you don't get anything.
Right.
And so that has to hang over your head. I had friends that worked at BYU. This is before they passed the ruling that you had to have a current recommend to work at BYU. Before that ruling went into place, I had friends that worked there that man and wife both worked for BYU, both figured out they didn't believe it anymore, and yet they had 5 years to go till retirement. And they had to, they felt they had to play the game of posing as a supporting Mormon for 5 years till they could get their retirement. Because if anyone knew that ahead of time, they would have been fired and lost all that money. And they would have had no savings, nothing to live on, had they sacrificed their pension from BYU. And it was very tough. The wife worked in the Mission Training Center, and every once in a while, the rhetoric at the Mission Center would get too much for her. She would make some statement to one of the kids, that's not true. And then she'd have to smooth feathers over, But they came close to not making it. Nowadays, they have the restriction where you have to have a temple recommend to keep teaching at BYU. Well, you can imagine the stress this puts on someone that figures out late in their career they don't believe anymore. If they want their retirement, they've got to keep the temple recommend to keep working there, which means a life of deception for whatever years they have left. I feel sorry for the church employees that are faced with this conundrum of how much is honesty worth to me? Can I afford to walk away?
And then we have the example of Grant Palmer that just waited till he was kind of retired to then become honest and come clean. I wonder why we don't have more of those people once they're retired.
Well, because even when you retire, you still have more, your family is still all Mormon. Yeah. And you sacrifice your family connections if you leave the church. If you've been an active Mormon and for years and then leave, it's going to have a heavy cost for you family-wise. You may have secured your retirement, but there's going to be many in your family that can't handle that. I think that the Matsons experienced this when they left. that it cost them a lot of friends and family to make that decision. I think everyone that's walked away has had to pay a cost.
A heavy cost.
A heavy cost.
Yeah.
Because of family alienation. Jerald and I were very fortunate that our families were mixed enough that there weren't an overwhelming number of fanatic Mormons in our families, and our immediate families were more tolerant of us, that we didn't pay the price that I see some other people pay. I don't think I could have done it alone. I needed Jerald's strength, especially as a young person. I mean, I look like a strong person now, but I mean, as an 18-year-old raised in Mormonism, it was not within my nature to challenge authority. And it would have been very hard for me to lose all my friends if I hadn't had Jerald, because it does make you lose your whole social network, even the ones that are kind to you, and that it just, you can't connect on the same way when they know you've left the church. Their lives revolve too much around Mormonism to be a part of your life.
Yeah. And I'm aware of at least one, Grant Palmer often wrote about a general authority who was emeritus that he had interacted with, who had lost his faith. And before Grant Palmer died, he made sure that I knew who that general authority was. And it was Elder Busha from Germany, who was a predecessor to Elder Uchtdorf from Germany.
Oh.
And I know for a fact that even though he had his full retirement and didn't believe and even hung out with Grant Palmer, he did not want it known publicly that he had lost his faith. He was concerned about his wife and what that might do to her, and concerned about extended family and his reputation and his children. And I would not be talking about it except for the fact that he passed away. And so now he's not around to kind of, but I think it's important that these stories get known, that we're not just theorizing here. There are general authorities that are on the payroll that do have pensions that still, even if they have the pension and they've retired, feel that for family reasons, they can't be open and honest. And it really is a form of coercion and societal pressure and manipulation that keeps the truth from coming out.
Right.
Yeah.
Sad.
So that's why we don't have more of that. So, So I mean, we've covered so much today, and the legacy. I guess I'll end with this, other than just to say thank you. Like, it does make you wonder if there's anything that could ever, that's, again, I've talked about the two big questions I always get. And one is there anything that's going to come that's really going to take the church down, that's really going to make a difference? And is the church now hitting this tipping point? And all these ex-Mormons want the church to hit this tipping point where they have this mass exodus. And as someone who's lived through probably the biggest earthquake to ever hit Mormonism, which is the Mark Hofmann scandal, which literally is only 30, 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And now everyone's forgotten it.
Yeah.
It begs the question, could there ever be an event that's big enough or catastrophic enough to really torpedo the church? Or is the church just here to stay and more resilient than ever?
I think there's a potential that something could hit that hard. I'd have to be something like some big financial scandal. But it's amazing the Mormons' ability to dismiss problems. They seem to be able to excuse anything when it comes to whether you stay faithful to the church. Things that never excuse in anyone else, that somehow church leaders can get a pass on because, it's just him. You expect too much. We're all human. We all have failings, and they make excuses for things. So, boy, what would it take to rock them? One of the problems is they're also old. I don't know that you could get much of a sex scandal out of them.
Yeah.
Uh,
And they're financially taken care of.
yeah.
So like, as long as they're taken care of till they die, do they have to worry about getting rich?
Yeah. Right. No.
Sex and money are taken out of the equation.
Yeah.
All you have is fame and power left. And they've got that.
Right. And they lose all that if they leave. So, I mean, theoretically, yes, something could break that would be devastating for them. But my assumption is they will just gradually morph into looking more like just some sect of Christianity and just gradually fade into a lesser known group that'll just lose meaning to people. I think there'll always be people that'll join it. But I think they've passed their peak on being able to sweep in all these major converts.
Unless in Africa, or the developing world.
Yes, but Mormonism is so much an American religion.
Mm-hmm.
Can they really be a church with all Filipinos and Africans with only white guys running the show? and if you put blacks in leadership at the top of the church, how does that change Mormonism? Does it become more and more an African church, for instance? Maybe someday move their headquarters to
Kenya,
Nairobi or someplace,
Ghana.
Yeah, to Ghana. So they'll have some growth, but I think it'll just become a lesser factor all the time to where you just won't hear about them.
Yeah. But they're richer than God right now.
Well, they'll keep going financially, but the membership isn't going to be as impressive. So I think that it's just a dwindling collection of people with the top guys holding a bag of a lot of money.
And they're going to go from a $400 billion church to $1 trillion church within the next 20 to 30 years. Have you thought about that?
No.
Just the way compound interest works. If you take the fact that Ensign Peak now has probably 130 billion, and that's just cash and stock and investment real estate, then you add in all the operational funds, cash, real estate holdings of the operational church, plus all the stuff we don't know about. The church is clearly worth 200 to 300 billion right now, at least. And then if you just say 7% interest, money tends to double, every 7 years at about 7% interest or something like that. You've got the church being $1 trillion church within 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, that's going to be a very rich church of 1 million people.
You think it's going to shrink at some point?
I think the percentage of the world population is going to get less and less. Number-wise, they might keep the same number of people. There may always be 15 million people on the rolls.
We're having a hard time surpassing 16 million. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. So, and only half of them go. So.
No, 1/3.
Oh, I was being generous.
Oh, okay.
So they may be able to maintain about a 15 million member church.
Well, I think what we're saying is a 5 million member active church.
Active church.
Because I think we're losing more than we're baptizing in that remain. And the only thing that keeps us from literally shrinking in number in active membership is the birth rate, which is still 3 kids per family instead of 2.
Right.
But the birth rate's in decline. So as soon as the birth rate declines to below 2, then you actually see the active membership shrinking. And it's right now it's at like less than 1%. So we're soon going to see a shrinkage rate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't see anything that's going to make the church suddenly have people flocking into it.
Yeah.
The potential is there for things to cause them to flee out of it.
Yeah.
So I see it as becoming less and less an important missionary organization, but it has enough money to always stay viable as an organization. It's just amazing to think that a few people are going to end up with a lot of money. I want to be a general authority.
A Mormon general authority.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, last thing is some birdie told me that someone's doing a biography of you and Jerald. Is that right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Ron Huggins, who's written articles in Dialogue and presented papers at Mormon History in different places, a friend of ours and a fellow Christian, never been Mormon, is doing our biography and signature books, is going to be the publisher. And it's taken several years, and I didn't know it was going to take this long. But anyways, they keep saying they're going to print it. So hopefully by the end of the year.
Is Huggins a good biographer? Is he a good historian? Do you know?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, he wrote one of the articles on Captain Kidd and money digging and stuff on Joseph Smith. It gets quoted a lot in different sources.
Years ago.
Yeah. So yeah, he's a good writer, good researcher. And we spent days and days going over material. I gave him access to all our files and whatever he wanted to see. He dug up all kind of stuff I'd forgot about. Now the question is going to be how long a biography signature is ready to print, because I don't think they're ready to print Ron's tome. So,
do you know who's editing it? Is it Levina?
No. I can't think of his name right off. But
Devery Anderson?
No.
Okay.
So, hopefully.
Have you read it?
I read Ron's long version, and when I read it, I thought, there is no way Signature's going to publish 1,000-page biography on the Tanners.
What was it like to read a 1,000-page biography on your life? What was that like?
Well, it was amazing how much you could put together on all of it. So I was encouraged that of all of the stories he was able to pull together, because we're lousy record keepers. In starting out, we had no concept of us ever being important. Only thing that was important was the documents, not our story. So we didn't save stuff. We didn't file stuff. So I'm amazed at what Ron was able to pull together.
Yeah.
So it was very fun for me to read through it because reliving all of those Sherlock Holmes moments in our lives was fun to go back through. But the average person, I don't know that they're sufficiently interested to want every detail of all of those things. So we'll have to find a happy medium somewhere that Signature can get their 250-page book or whatever they're planning on out of this. But it'll be a lot shorter than what Ron turned in. So you won't get all the goodies.
We can always publish the PDF, right?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. The reason I heard about this is somebody got access to the manuscript, and this just made me personally happy, told me that I appeared in it briefly, only because it seems to mention a resurgence of interest in UTLM and you after my interview with you.
yes.
Is there any truth to that? Did we help generate some interest in your work?
Yes.
Well, you haven't told me about that. Tell me about that. Come on.
Well, yes. When you did when you called and asked me about doing the interview, I seriously had reservations of doing this because I didn't know what kind of an audience would be listening to this and how you would be framing your questions, what would be your motive or agenda in what you wanted to get me to say that I'd be embarrassed about later.
Okay.
And
sounds like you didn't think much of me, Sandra.
Well, I was afraid you were going to go after me.
I adored you.
Oh, well, thank you. But
I still do.
Anyways, I wasn't sure where it would all go. And so I really prayed about it. And I felt led to go ahead and do the interview with you. And I think
thank you, Heavenly Father, for telling Sandra to do the interview with me. Keep going.
So, and I'm glad I did do it because it opened.
Did I do gotchas? Did I try and embarrass you?
Oh, I think there were a few gotchas in there, but
intentional? Like I set you up, or
no? But the hard questions. I mean, the hard questions about my faith and my feelings on gay rights and the Bible and all those things. That
you've got some heat for those
from you. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry,
but
I wasn't trying to do a gotcha.
No, but a lot of people that get interviewed aren't asked as detailed questions about their faith. If they still believe some part of Mormonism, you wouldn't ask them the same questions you asked me of why do you still believe? And so I knew that going into it, that I would be asked questions you would not ask someone that still believed Mormonism. Anyways.
It's just the Christians that ask those questions. Like Kathleen Melanakis and Paul. I just recently interviewed Paul. Anyway, keep going.
So I went ahead and decided to do the interview, and I'm glad it did.
Why?
It opened up the world of the internet and podcast, Facebook, and suddenly I had 3,000 people that wanted to be my friend on Facebook. And by the way, don't ask to be my Facebook friend. I am inundated with too many people. Anyways, it turned out to be a very positive thing, and it brought awareness to our research that had been forgotten, just like with the Mark Hofmann case. After so many years, people move on to the next thing that's going on. And so Jeremy Reynolds comes along with his CES letter, and everyone thinks all these documents and problems came about at the time of his letter. And I'm reading his letter, and it's like, ho hum, yeah, that's good, that's interesting, but we talked about this 30 years ago.
Yeah, all right.
So it continues to help us in bringing people to us to their awareness. And so I'm so glad I did it.
Is that why you were willing to come do
That's
this
why
again?
I was willing to come do this one, yeah.
Yeah.
Since I had nothing else to do today.
Right. So people, did it help with donations or, financial support at all? I really wanted it to.
Yes, it did. We got people, we picked up people that were concerned to make sure that we kept in business and kept going. So yes, it has helped. Yeah.
Well, that was a major motivator for me because you could accuse me of all sorts of things. People do. You should be able to relate to that because people have done that to you and Jerald, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes a lot of the the bad reputation comes from smears and slander. But you can accuse me of a lot of things, but I feel like I respect my ex-Mormon forefathers and pioneers, whether it was Grant Palmer or the September 6 or you and Jerald. I feel sincerely indebted to and grateful for you guys. And it has always been a goal of mine for whoever's willing, Carolyn Pearson, the Toscanos, whoever's willing, I want to let the world know that we all stand on your amazing shoulders and that we owe you guys a huge debt of gratitude because there would be no Mormon Stories without the Tanners, and there would be no CES letter without the Tanners. Yeah. There might not even be a Sunstone or or a dialogue without the Tanners.
Who knows?
And so, I am just so delighted to hear that I could play a small role in A, helping you stay alive financially, and B, bringing more awareness to you and Jerald.
Yep, it's working. Thank you.
Okay, this is literally my last question. Anything you want to say in your reflections about Jerald as you were watching this movie, as you've been thinking more towards the end of your life, messages for Jerald, thoughts about Jerald, reflections on Jerald? I want to end with that, if you want to share. If there's anything you want to share. Well,
it was a lot of good memories. With Jerald, I'm like Watson to his Sherlock Holmes.
I was going to say that.
And so it brought back a lot of great memories of our times of researching together and discussions and all that. I think the video has been good for my son who lives here in town. He was real excited when he heard about the video coming out. He says, I just remember that as a kid of, wow, there was a bombing. Wow, mom and dad are talking to the reporters and it just, he says, I want to know it from an adult, not just as a kid. Mm-hmm. So he really enjoyed this series. And a lot of people that have known us through the years didn't know about that period of our life because it's 35 years ago. So that's been really fun to have different friends say, oh, wow, I didn't know you then, or I knew you then and I didn't know you were going through that then. And so, yeah, it's all been good.
And what are I imagine you're still hoping to see Jerald someday. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It's getting closer. Yeah, I believe that I'll see Jerald again. And I believe that I don't believe in marriage and heaven, but
the Bible kind of doesn't let you believe in
that. No,
it
says we're going to be brothers and sisters. And but I'm assuming there will still be memory of your time together on earth and those things. So I'm expecting there to be an association with Jerald, just not in the same way. But I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you want to see him again?
Yes, I want to see him again and give him a hug. I still miss him. As grief mellows through the years, but there are still those moments of when you feel the loss and the nights when you wake up feeling alone in the bed. But the memories get sweeter, and you forget when you used to have arguments and why you were mad at him because he left the milk out. And those things aren't important anymore. And so a lot of good memories, and I'm looking forward to giving him a hug.
Yeah, and hanging out. And talking Mormon history.
We can share stories. Oh, Jerald, did you see what happened after you left?
And then you guys will be able to like look back at the whole history of humankind. Yeah. And you can all know where exactly you got it right, where you got it wrong, and how it all fit.
Yep. I hope there's some sort of instant replay where we could press it. I want to see 1970 again.
And when that instant replay happens, my prediction is the Tanners will have been accurate or right about 98 to 99% of the time.
Well, I hope so.
What rating would you give yourself?
Oh, I don't know. I think we got pretty high marks, but I don't know that we're perfect. I wouldn't say 100%.
98. I said 98.
Yeah,
98,
well, maybe 90. I don't know.
90 is still pretty good. Well, Sandra Tanner, I hope it comes across that I adore you. I hope you didn't feel like there were any gotchas today.
No, it's all fine.
And I hope you know, on behalf of my listeners, you for sure are a top 5 interview of all time. And I want to communicate to you on behalf of all my listeners how much we love and appreciate you and Jerald and your contributions. And I want to have an event when COVID's over where I invite all the listeners and viewers that love and appreciate you to the church of your choice. And I want to have an evening where we honor you and people can just give you a standing ovation for all that you've done. What do you think about that? Will you do it? Would you come to it?
Well,
no,
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have thought about when I retire or when our biography comes out at some point of having some sort of open house somewhere and just to meet everybody whose life I've touched through the years, to have a chance to say hello again. It would be fun to have a meetup of some kind.
Well, I'm offering to get the word out and to be play whatever role in that open house that you would like me to play. No pressure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have to keep that on the drawing board.
Is there anyone else alive who's interviewed you for more hours than me in total?
No.
Huh?
No, you're the winner.
Yes. Did you hear that?
You
I won
first.
something. I won something. Yeah, no one's interviewed you more than me. That makes me really happy.
Okay.
All right, Sandra Tanner, we love you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
And final words to Jerald and Tyler about their documentary?
Thank you for all your effort and good luck. I hope it shows a lot of years on Netflix.
All right. Thanks, Sandra Tanner. We love you. Thanks so much. Thanks, listeners.
Bye.
Hope you've enjoyed this. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. Please donate to Utah Lighthouse Ministry, utlm.org. Support Sandra Tanner because she has at least 20 more years to go. That's my prediction. Do you like that prediction, 20 years?
Yes, okay.
Can you give us 20 more years? Good years?
My aunt lived to be 100. She just died a couple of months ago during COVID and had all of her faculties.
And you're still cogent.
She couldn't walk good, but she remembered everything.
So maybe I'm going to try and persuade you to do more podcast episodes about content, not necessarily about your story, because maybe you've still got more contributions.
Oh, who knows?
Are you still writing?
Well, the newsletter.
You still do the newsletter?
Yep.
Why don't I know that?
I don't know. Because I don't do it very often.
Okay. And what's it about, the newsletter?
This next newsletter is going to be on Joseph Smith's calling as a translator.
Oh.
What does it mean to be a translator?
Yeah.
What's that word mean? And in Mormon parlance, it doesn't mean what Webster said.
Yeah. Especially now.
Yeah, right.
Especially now, it means nothing like the word translating. But that's how apologetics works.
Yep.
All right. So donate to UTLM, buy books and everything from UTLM. Go visit Sandra at her store. Support UTLM and Sandra Tanner.
Okay.
And support Mormon Stories. If you appreciate this episode, if you like this type of content, the more we're around, the more we can support others as well. So go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. Less than 1 out of 1,000 of you actually donate. If, double of you donated, we would exist until I'm dead, which hopefully will be at least 50 years.
There we go.
And so please support us. And thanks for all your support. I love you guys. Shout out to Jerald, Hess, and Tyler Measom for your wonderful documentary, for bringing all this to the surface. Thanks, guys. I can't wait to have you on. And I'm looking forward to all the other people I'm going to be interviewing too. Thanks for all your support. You guys take care. Thanks to Brooklyn Alden for her editing, Gerardo for the cinematography here, and everyone who supports us, our board. Clint Martin and Carrie Whitbeck. My brain's fried just like Sandra's. Thanks to everyone who makes this all possible. Tune in again soon for more episodes of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody. Thanks again, Sandra.
Thank you.